All right, well, hello, everybody. My name is Nicole Parker, and I'm the project coordinator for Trans Action Florida. Thank you so much for joining us on TransChat. TransChat is a virtual town hall series featuring trans and non-binary community leaders. Today, we will be talking about the Black trans experience. So when we talk about marginalized groups and marginalized communities, Black trans women are some of the most marginalized, going through some of the worst things that you can think of. Today, we have three amazing panelists that we're very, very excited to bring on and really just give their perspective about how their transition has been. First, we have Tatyana Williams. Before joining the staff at the multicultural aid service organization Miracle of Love, Mulan volunteered for the group by providing outreach on the streets and in clubs. As a former sex worker, she understands what her community needs. She provides HIV testing and linkage to care and manages the group's drop-in center. Along with that, she uses her home as a safe haven for trans sex workers, a place where the ladies can get condoms, bottled water, clothes, and of course, emotional support. Help me welcome Mulan. Hello.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm good today. How are you?
Good. Thanks for joining us.
No problem.
Next, we have Tatyana Williams. Tatyana was born and raised in Miami-Dade County, Liberty City. She has been an advocate for the LGBTQ community for over 18 years. Since Tatyana's transition over 30 years ago, she's established, maintained, and developed positive relationships with community leaders, elected officials, the board of directors who promote legislation that support the LGBTQ community. Tatyana is currently the Florida Department of Health Broward County's HIV Prevention Planning Council Community Co-Chair. Tatyana is also the co-founder and executive director of Trans Inclusive Group. The organization's mission is to advocate and work with the community stakeholders to promote, protect, and defend equality for transgender and LGBTQ individuals by building trust and relationships in order to end discrimination, stigma, and racial disparities in healthcare, employment, education, and housing. Help me in welcoming Tatyana Williams.
Good evening, everyone. It's nice to see you. It's nice to be with you. Hi, Nicole. Hi, Mulan.
Hello, hello. How are you?
I am great.
Good. Thanks for joining us.
My pleasure.
Last but not least, we have Shay Cutliff. Shay is a business professional in the Central Florida area, driven by her passion for her community and providing and being able to identify and bridge gaps. When she is not working with the Miami-Dade Housing Department, securing the futures of thousands of families, she is in her community on the front line, speaking up for marginalized communities. She has been a champion by partnering with organizations such as the Human Rights Campaign and the One Orlando Alliance to identify sustainable wage living jobs for trans and gender nonconforming individuals in Central Florida. Can you help me all in welcoming Shay? Hey, how are you? Good. Well, thank you all so much for joining.
Hi, Mulan. Hi, Tatyana. Hi, Nicole.
How are you, darling?
Hey, love. Hey, love. Thanks for joining us. I'm so glad that you all are here to have this conversation, because I think a lot of times when you think of the trans experience, there's so many experiences out there.
There's a lag, so bear with me a little bit.
Okay, no worries. But I think one that is not really talked about a lot is the Black trans experience. And I think what's needed is just a really open dialogue about how that experience is. So first and foremost, I want to start with Tatyana. Tatyana, as a Black trans woman in South Florida, what was your transition like?
As you mentioned earlier when you introduced me, transitioning over 30 years ago, it was something definitely probably unimaginable, especially in this day and time. When you think about discrimination, when you think about the inequalities, when you think about equity, when you think about just access to healthcare or access to any other services. So transitioning back in those days, we didn't even have the opportunities that are afforded today as it relates to education, employment. Back then, employers wasn't accepting to the trans gender, right? They were more accepting to us when we identified more as some would say it now, MSM. it was difficult for us. So we had to turn to things that are probably wasn't the best in order to survive, right? So when you look at where we are today in society, some of the things that still exist, but I do see some way in for the trans community where we have other options. But back then, I mean, it was a lack of respect, a lack of understanding. People just did not get it. So I'm just fortunate enough to be still here and alive because many of my other sisters, brothers are not here to even witness what we've came as a community.
Absolutely. And I think it's powerful what you said about just how it's so different. And, you know, I think kids nowadays don't realize how many more resources there are than there were way back when. The fact that you can go to a doctor, you can speak openly about being trans, you can live out loud. You know, back then you had to be stealth. You know, you tried to get through life and just make it. You couldn't go to a doctor. Sometimes they'll look at you like you're crazy. You know what I mean? Right. And I think how is that for you, kind of just seeing how everything has changed so much?
Well, it's a good thing for me. You know, I always told people that if I had to do a do-over, I would do things totally different now, right? Because we have more resources, we have more support spaces, which is how I got to where I am today, making sure that we create support spaces that is reflective of everyone, right? So when I started working in community, I didn't really see a lot of support spaces that looked like me. And a lot of times in our community, there's a lot of things out there that proclaim to be LGBT inclusive and accepted. But when you really take a deeper dive, you see that the T is not always included. So for me, I think it's a very good deal that we are able to just like live our authentic lives as it relates to name change, as it relates to, you know, changing all of our information to identify us as the correct person that we want to identify. So I just think that we have so many things out there that can really help us navigate and don't get those, you know, those extra looks, those extra stares when we're trying to conduct business and just be ourselves.
Absolutely. 100%. Mulan, what was it like transitioning for you?
Well, for me, I transitioned over like 25, 26 years ago. It was very different than now. My only resource were the streets back then for transitioning and the older girls. That's how we got hormones. Unfortunately, back then, there was, like Tatyana said, no room for doctors or anything like that of us going to. So I transitioned very fast. I did a talent show. And then about 2 weeks later, I was full-time. And when I say full-time, that was outside, daytime, my pads, and I didn't like wearing pads. So at the time, black market seal was hot. It was like our only way of enhancing our bodies to get the woman figure and to get breasts at the time. So unfortunately, I went that route. At the time, I thought it was a good idea, but fast forward today, it's probably one of the biggest mistakes I ever made.
No, absolutely. And the silicone thing, I don't think a lot of communities really understand. It's like, oh, you know, why would you go do that? People don't understand that when we look at ourselves in the mirror, we see who we were. You know, regardless of how far we've come, we see who we were. And we want to go ahead and create who we really are. And even if it means going and taking, you know, black market hormones, going to get silicone, things like that. Now the research has come out, which is amazing. You know, it's horrible that it took so many individuals to die from it, but now doctors are looking at it like, okay, we need to help you get this out, or we need to help you kind of maintain this. And I think back then it was more just like a silent thing you went through. If you were hurting, you kind of just didn't tell anybody and you moved on. And that's a really scary thing.
Right. Very scary. For me, at the time when I first got my black market silicone, everything was great with it. It was over a period of time that I started having trouble with it. But that's a whole nother story.
We had to do what we had to do in order to achieve that look that we were trying to achieve at that time. And nowadays, and you know, I tell people every day that I count my blessings, right? Because I'm probably one of the fortunate ones that, you know, I don't promote silicone, but it didn't put me in positions that I have seen it do to others as it relates to discoloration. They had to have certain things amputated. So I just count my blessings that I was fortunate enough to make it through that. And a lot of people out here pose as their silicone doctors or XYZ, and they're doing XYZ, and they're doing more harm to us than good. So, you know, I'm just thankful that there's other options today that we do not have to do that.
Right. And another thing back then, in our day, you know, in order to be classified as a woman or transgender, you had to have work. It wasn't like it is now that, oh, I feel like I'm a woman, so you are trans. No, the girls that you know back in the day, you're a man if you don't have breasts, you're a man if you don't have face work. And that's how kind of what I was brought up on. Not saying that that was the right way or the wrong way, but that's the way we were brought up in that time, about 25, 26 years ago.
It's true. And I mean, it depends on who, you know, like we all had trans mothers and someone transitioned us. And it was the same thing with me, is that mine was like, listen, you can look whatever way that you want, but until you get this, this, and this done, you're not trans. Like, I don't know what you want me to tell you. And I never understood it back then. I get so frustrated. I'm like, what do you mean? I'm living my life like this. She's like, no, you need to go to these steps. And I think it's beautiful that that's evolved. And it's really evolved into living who you are. If you want to get surgeries done, you can. If you don't have to. I like that there's not necessarily an expectation as there used to be once upon a time.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
And I know that we kind of talked about resources, and I know it's different. As you said, Tatyana, in South Florida, there wasn't really any. Mulan, can you kind of talk to, I know you talked about having to go to the streets for resources, but as time has gone on, can you kind of talk about that progression of how now there's places that you can go, talk about how you're a safe haven and you provide resources for girls?
Oh yeah, everything is totally different. Like I said, back in the day, we were there was nothing for us. We didn't think. I mean, we didn't even think we can go to the doctors. You know, we didn't have healthcare or anything like that. But today, everything is totally different. You have doctors dealing. You have agencies like this, and like the one in Miami with Tatyana, that specifically help transgender women. You know, we help them. We point them in the right direction to the resources if they knew nothing about them. You know, it's just like I feel like it's amazing, and I just wish that someone was around when I was coming up to do the same thing. Because some of these agencies have been here for forever. We just didn't know anything about them.
And that's the thing. It's that I think when I thought about resources early on, and you think of LGBTQ resources for gay men, typically, you know, like if you go into a center or anything like that, it was typically just gay men. And sometimes you kind of felt like you fit in, most of the time you didn't, you know what I mean? And now as time goes on, I'm glad that there is trans-led organizations. There's organizations that make it a priority to take care of trans individuals. It's so important. You know, we talk about all the time, especially in Central Florida, after the Pulse tragedy, we realized that there's so many gaps. These gaps have been here for years in every part of the state. But I think that tragedy really kind of started the conversation, and really seeing so many trans leaders and so many leaders of different identities come out of the woodworks and say, listen, I have an experience and I want to talk about it. It helps people with representation. When we think back, it's like, how many people did we know? I could probably count on my hand of trans people that I knew when I was younger. And nowadays the representation is just so different.
Yeah.
Shay, can you talk about how your transition was like? I think she might be experiencing a little lag. Okay, I'll give her a second. We'll just go ahead and go to the next. So I'm going to jump around a little bit.
Please.
So for Tatyana,
I would say being a younger millennial. Yeah, being a younger millennial, it was a little bit easier because I feel a lot of things.
Can you hear us? Okay.
So yeah, I think it was pretty easy in society because it was more seen. RuPaul was on TV. Everybody loved going to drag shows that I knew. So it was a lot easier than I think it was for maybe Tatyana or even Mulan, and we're not even that many years apart. I think I have a lot of positives because of that, but I still have experienced a lot of negativity based around gender issues, mainly only because I'm trans. And I think that at a certain point, that becomes a little disheartening because you feel as though you're doing everything that you can as a person to be accepted in society. And I think a lot of us, we battle with that. of being our authentic selves and being the self that is accepted in society. And sometimes those things aren't the same things. And I think at a certain point in life, we have to start, or should I say in the world in general, we need to start going down a road of acceptance of people in all walks of life. That goes from the club to the bedroom to the job. I know a lot of trans women who can find employment only because they have very specialized skills. And a lot of women are in that privileged group to be able to do that. And I think that in turn creates a large gap for people who are trying to just be themselves and live a life that's normal and on par with their cisgender counterparts.
No, absolutely. And I think it's amazing that you say that. A lot of people think like, oh, you know, we're going through this transition and we're trying to do this and we're trying to do that. We're just wanting to live authentically. We just want to be happy. We just want to be like everybody else. Sometimes it's weird to me when you explain your transition to certain people, right? And some people are like, I totally get that. And some people are like, why did you feel the need to go this far, or whatever the case may be? I hate that term, this far. Irritates me, because I'm like, I don't think of it as far. I think of it as doing what I need to do to live my authentic life.
I want to dive a little deeper into what Shea was saying as it relates to having access to education, being able to navigate spaces, because back then when we were transitioning, it was different. And now you have people, especially some of our counterparts, especially in different races, they'll get the education, they'll do everything that they need to do, and then they transition after. But in most cases with Black trans women, it's a little bit different for us, right? So when we're trying to move in spaces, or when we're trying to access employment, when we're looking for that equity to uplift our community, it's like we don't have the leverage, because we kind of like started behind, we started a little bit behind because we were more so focusing on our transition opposed to focusing on what we need in order to improve and have a productive life, right? So when it comes to the Black trans experience, it's just so many different things, especially with Black trans women that we experience. And now as we're older, now as we have more resources, we're able to look at it and say, now, if I was able to do it over, this is how I would have did it. This is what I would do.
Because back in our day, it was told to me when I came out, you're either going to be a showgirl or you're going to be a sex worker. Those are the two choices that I had.
It is. When in that, you have to think of when we're looking at a marginalized community. So if you're looking at a trans woman who may happen to be white, for instance, like you said, possibly a higher chance of family acceptance, possibly a higher chance of all of these different things. But one thing that we all know is that in the Black community, you can do a lot of things, but God forbid you're LGBTQ. Oh, then you're the devil. God forbid you do this, you do that. But there's a whole list of other things that anyone else can do that we're not able to do just because being LGBTQ in our family. Can anybody who wants to kind of jump into that, can someone kind of speak to that? What it was like telling your family, what it's like to be a Black trans woman in the Black community?
Well, for me, I was raised by my grandmother coming up as a child, and around 15 years old, I was getting into trouble. So I was sent to live with my biological mother. I was with her for about a week and a half, and then she just flat out asked me. She knew something was up. She just blurted it out, "Are you gay?" And I got offended, of course, and I rebutted, "Yeah, send me back to Florida." And she said, "I'm going to send you back. I just want to let you know I'm bisexual and what you want to do." So my reply was, "Oh, Ma, I just want to dye my hair blonde." She got my hair dyed for me. She accepted me well. The only thing about it that I didn't like, the very next day, she told me that I had to tell my siblings. It was no question, said I had to tell them. And I get her reasoning. She wanted me to do that because she wanted me to be me. She told me I didn't have to hide who I was, and she was like, if they don't like it, forget them, And unfortunately, one of my brothers, he was not going for it at all. Like I said, I was like 15 or 16 then. We didn't start having a relationship until I was I'll say about 30. He finally accepted me and just started calling me Milan. But as far as my mother, she's always accepted me. She was my biggest fan. I had more problems with society during my transition.
What about you, Tatyana?
For me, I have a different, I didn't have to tell my mother anything really, like Mulan to an extent. I didn't have to tell her anything. She picked up on a lot of things, and she always say to me that, we have these conversations about people disowning their kids when they find out that they're gay and all of that stuff. And she never understood that, because she would always say, if you really, really loved your child, you would love your child unconditionally. So she never got it. But she said, if you are paying attention as a parent, if you are paying attention to your children, there are certain things that you will see and that you would notice. And she noticed that I would gravitate to more feminine things, dolls, etc. And I was stealing dolls from my family house and bringing them back home. And she knew there was something different about me. So she kind of like accepted me and gave me the opportunity to just express myself and be exactly who I was. The only thing that I kept from her that she brought to me was me when I was starting to do sex work. So she kind of realized what I was doing. And one day I came in the house and she sat down. She said, I know what you're doing. And I'm like, what you talking about? And she said, oh, I know what you're doing. And excuse my French. She said, you selling your ass. And I was like, girl, I don't know what you're talking about. She said, that's what you're doing. So that was the one thing that I had to come forth and tell her, okay, this is what's going on. But as it relates to my transition, she was very accepting. My family was always accepting. And I can just think back when, my aunts she was on the phone, and my aunts, they know family history, and they were calling me the old name. And she was like, well, her name is this now, and her, she, and she kind of got them onto the her, she. So she kind of like groomed other family members on how I want to be addressed. And when I come around, this is what it is. Now, I know we got history, we go way back, but this is the case and this is what's going on. So I had an accepting family on that part. And as Mulan mentioned, my thing was in society. It wasn't in the household. I was shown love in the household.
No, and that's amazing. I think it's beautiful to see someone say that their family accepted them, because many of us know, but yeah, go ahead, Shay.
My family was very accepting. My immediate family was very accepting. My mother was very accepting. And my friends were pretty accepting.
Good.
I'm sorry. Yeah, so being accepted in the Black community, we were very much a church family. Not my immediate family, but my extended family was very big on church. In my hometown, there's like churches named after us and everything. So it was a big responsibility living in a small town like that, trying to transition. And I knew it wasn't possible. I didn't even attempt it. I didn't even try it, because I knew if I did, there was a lot of connotations that came with that. There was a lot of trans women who got talked bad about in the beauty salons. My aunt does hair, and I heard her talk about women in the beauty salons. I've heard her talk about lesbians in the beauty salon, called the B word and the D word. And so it's like, yeah, I knew this wasn't possible. So my mom, luckily, is a trendsetter in herself. She was an electrician and she traveled a lot. So coming to Florida was actually a little bit of a blessing. I got to come to Florida. Florida was a more open and accepting environment than Georgia was. There were more women like me. I saw women like Mulan growing up, doing shows and things like that, looking very pretty and glamorous. And I knew I wanted to be like those women. I just really needed to break my mindset of, I need to propel myself forward and I needed to do what that takes. And for me, I was one of those women who waited till I went to college and I was on my way to education and making my life a little bit better before I started my transition. And I really think that led me to regret some of the parts of my transition. I wish I had transitioned a lot earlier, which is why I do what I do. If that can help any woman or any young girl or any young person transition that much earlier, I would love to facilitate them on their road of self-discovery, even if I'm just helping them, you know, find employment or something like that, that really helps a person live their life.
No, thank you for sharing that, Shay. It's so important to pay it forward. And us in the trans community, we tend to do that naturally. It's like you think back of all these individuals helped you. So then when you see somebody who needs help, you kind of just naturally jump into that space. And I think it's kind of like the maternal thing that we have, where it's like we're all kind of a community. Let's just work together. Tatyana, I want to ask you, so what inspired you to create Trans Inclusive Group? And tell us about it, what inspired you, and how can someone get involved if they want to?
Well, I want to be unapologetic about while we're having this conversation. For me, I just didn't see a representation of me. When I was trying to navigate these spaces, I didn't see a representation of me. And I think that it's important. There's a few places that I went and I seen Black trans women. However, I think when we are in these spaces, like, you know, where Mulan is and what Shay is doing, it's like they were in spaces, but they wasn't doing anything productive as it relates to improving the quality of life for our women, right? So I said to myself, I needed to create something that was reflective of me. Me thinking about the women in the past when I was sitting in these spaces with a lot of women of color, but majority being white women. And when I would think about the resources that they were speaking to as it relates to how do you access hormones? How do you get your name and gender marker change? They were talking about HIV services, and I knew that there was many of my friends that had succumbed to HIV, right? So I'm thinking about, like, why is all of this information and these resources are here, but these women are not showing up? So when I would see women in the community, I would explain to them, and they was like, where's this happening? So we just decided to come together and with Trans Inclusive Group. Now, what the beautiful part about Trans Inclusive Group is that we not only advocate for Black trans women or trans women as it speaks to color, etc. I met this young man, which is the other co-founder of Trans Inclusive Group, Carson Graham. And the dynamic, you know, he started explaining to me about these trans men, because I didn't, you know, where I came from, I didn't know. I'm not going to say I didn't know it was a such thing, but it was something that we just never wrapped our head around. So when he was like, oh, you know, we got XYZ, and we started having those conversations, and then he started saying that about the things that they experience, right? Some of the things that they go through, and I'm like, okay, well, some of these things mirror. So how about this? Let's create a group, because it started as a group. Let's create a group, have community come in, you know, do a needs assessment, etc. And that's how it developed. But more people started coming to the group, and not just coming to the group for support. They started coming to the group trying to access resources, right? So, and a lot of organizations have a tendency, just being frank, to tokenize our community. And that's not what I wanted. I didn't want our community, and he didn't want that either. We bringing people into spaces for people to tokenize them, say we want to do research, we want to do XYZ. We wanted something that was intentional. We wanted something that was genuine, and we wanted to respect what we was doing for our community. And that's how Trans Inclusive came into play. So we do everything from accessing hormones, PrEP, NPEP, HIV testing, support, food, anything that you can name that's going to help improve the quality of life for trans and gender nonconforming individuals. We're going to make sure if we don't have it, we're going to go out there and find it. So we just like a source of resource, we are a form of resource for our community, whatever that looks like. Housing, if you call me up and say, I don't have a place to stay tonight, Nicole, I'm going to say, I got you. I'm going to find you. We're going to find it. We're going to make it happen. Anything that you need to keep you off the streets, to keep food in your belly, whatever that is, that's what we're willing to do. And how we can help. This is the thing that's very, very, very important, right? People speak to allyship and speak about allies and all that good stuff, but it's important that you support the work of trans identified individuals, and it's specific Black trans women and Black trans-led organizations and trans-led organizations in general. It's important that people take the time out to understand, take the time out to research, you know, because if you research, you will understand there's an underserved, there's a marginalized, there's a disproportionately impacted community that really needs resources. And oftentimes these people donate to larger entities, and they are assuming that this funding is reaching the transgender community, and most times it is not. So it's important that, you know, our people, our community understand that you can go to these specific places and donate directly to them, for we can help to do the work, you know, that we can do. Back then it was something different, but now we're here. We are capable, we're qualified, we have the management skills, we have the tools to uplift and work for our people.
No, it's so true. And there was one thing that you say that I want you to clarify. So if anybody is watching and they're not really understanding what tokenizing the trans community is, can you talk to that a bit?
Absolutely. That's bringing the trans community in for the benefit of your good, and then the trans community is not getting anything in return. So you're bringing them in for the look, right? And you're bringing them in for you can appear to be all inclusive. However, when my siblings come and try and access a resource, it's not there. When my siblings are coming and they really need something, you don't have it. So you're bringing us in for the look, but you're not bringing us in for intentional work.
Absolutely, 100%. Mulan, what inspired you to create Divas Dialogue?
Well, Divas Dialogue has been a long time coming. I will give flowers when they are due. I used to watch on Facebook, Tatyana. I followed her group, and I was like, wow, that's something I need here. That's something I want to bring here. But it took me a while to start because I didn't have enough confidence in myself because I was just coming into the field. So when I did it, I wanted to be able to do all the things that she was just talking about that her program does. I wanted to be able to offer the same things. So I took my time, and it's finally here, and it's amazing. The women of Orlando have been supporting it. The few times that we have met so far before COVID, it's always been a group of 20 to 22 Black trans women that they're alone speaks volumes to me. And I just wanted something different than, like, there were no support trans groups here in Orlando. Like some agencies, they would have little courses for us, but then it would be just that courses, and then it would be over, nothing else. They don't know you anymore, it seemed like, you know. So I want to do something that they could be a part of and stay a part of, not nothing that would just cut them off. Because like she said, there are a lot of agencies, and I just talked about this, so there are a lot of agencies that are checking off the Black and brown trans box, but they're not doing anything at all. There are agencies that are getting funding to help the trans woman, but they're not helping at all. So I want to do something that I knew I was going to be able to do and fulfill. So that's why I started Divas Dialogue.
No, and thank you for starting that initiative, because when you think about it, you've been a safe haven for so many individuals for so long, and now it's just blossomed into something where it can just snowball into whatever you want it to be. So it's absolutely amazing. Shay, I wanted to ask, can you speak to some of the work that you're doing in the community and what inspired you to do this work?
Right now, I'm working on an initiative with the help of the One Alliance and Miracle of Love, Mulan's agency, and a couple other agencies to try to empower trans women with some employment or employable skills or job readiness to get them into the job market. I was inspired by this, by my own journey and struggles with getting into the job market, not being taken seriously, even though I've had the experience to be taken seriously, not being given the opportunity to show what I'm really made of only because of my gender. And really, I want to break that barrier for a lot of women, because I think we have a lot of talented women in our job pool. I think we have a lot of talented people in our community. I want to get away from saying women, but we're talking about women right now. But I really want to empower all trans people and non-binary people to be in a workplace. I want to be able to go into an office and see the secretary is a trans person or a non-binary person. I want to go into the bank and the person cashing my check is a non-binary person or a trans person. I want to see us in real spaces. I want to see us occupying space. I want to see us taking up real space and being real pillars in our community and being taken seriously. So that's what really drives me, is my passion for all trans women or trans people to be empowered on a greater level.
And speaking to Shay again, this and I'm so thankful that Equality Florida has took the initiative to do something like this so we can educate the broader community, because it's important that they understand. So you have a group of trans women sitting here that are leaders within the community, and we're speaking to the lack of resources. We're speaking to what our community needs, but we don't always have the resources to make that happen, right? And they give funding and they support larger entities, and at the end of the day, our community is still suffering. So that's important, to note that.
Absolutely.
It is so important to realize what is kind of being said here. It's, when speaking to businesses, I'll say all the time, it's profitable to be inclusive. Like, it's weird to me how you're not going to want a certain group of people working for you, because no matter who it is, if your employee feels validated, feels comfortable, and feels supported, they're going to go 110% for you. So why wouldn't you make your policies and procedures inclusive? Why wouldn't you make the workplace inclusive of all people? Because your goal is to have a successful, profitable business. And just because someone's trans doesn't mean that they don't know how to work. They don't know how to do anything. We have skills just like anybody else. And it's very, very true. What I've heard all three of you say is that, it's kind of like, listen, we're sitting on this panel talking about the gaps in resources. So this is a question for all of you. Anyone can take it first. What is something that you needed when you were younger, or that you still need, that's a huge gap in the community, resource-wise?
I won't say when I would, and I have to say, because sometimes I have to check my own privileges, if you may, when I'm working in community, because I do have them, right? I was fortunate enough to have my family to look over me to an extent, and I started doing things outside of the scope of what they thought that I should have been doing, if you may. But I would say that even then, I've seen my siblings, my people in community had issues with housing. And housing is one of the biggest things that we have an issue with in our community. We have resource after resource, but if we don't have that essential need, and I say essential, critical need of housing, the rest of the stuff does not matter. Communities speak to prevention. We speak about PrEP, testing, all that stuff. But when we're talking about HIV prevention, when we're talking about keeping people adherent to care, we have to think about all the things that they need. So when we speak about housing, that means we need to figure out how we bring housing into the conversation when it relates to prevention, when it relates to care, when we're talking about essential supporting services. We have to figure out how do we get that, because there's a lot of funding that's out there for housing. However, if the individual is not HIV positive, then that individual can't necessarily access all the resources that they can. We have to figure out, if we are trying to prevent our community and prevent these women, these men from contracting anything outside of HIV, just anything, we have to think about the root. Your home is your root. And if you don't have no root, you don't have anything. So we need to step up in community. This is important that our legislators, this is important that our elected officials understand how important housing is for everyone. You shouldn't have to have a disease in order to get adequate health housing. You should not have to. That's unacceptable.
Housing is, you need, like you said, a roof over your head. And I had this conversation with someone a few weeks back. It's like, okay, well, if someone doesn't have housing, why don't they go to a shelter? I'm like, can you imagine being trans, a person of color, not having your identification changed, and going into a shelter and having to go with the gender that you are no longer? That is mortifying, number one, dangerous, number two. I don't think people really understand that most people would rather sleep on the street than go to a shelter. Would rather sleep anywhere that they can than go to a shelter. And that says something. That is a huge, gigantic gap everywhere in the United States as far as trans housing. What's another gap? And anyone can jump in on this.
Access to healthcare. Back in my day, even though everything I went through has made me the person I am today, but I do wish that doctors were available with hormones back in the day. And I just wish someone was there to talk to me like I talk to the girls now. I just wish someone was there to help to navigate. I wish they had centers like this around when I was around, with trans working there to reaching out to the girls. I think that would have made life a little bit better.
The doctor piece that you speak to, a competent doctor, a doctor that knows how to deal with trans individuals, because the worst thing that you can get is a doctor who treats you like a science project or something weird, or we're going to test this out on you. I hate when they say that. I'm like, don't test anything on me. You know what I mean? Help me, give me, what I need to move on.
Exactly.
Shay, is there any gaps that haven't been said that you know of?
Like I said, the reason why I got into the work that I'm doing right now is because I really feel like there's a gap in employment for trans, non-binary people, gender non-conforming people, any person who is not fitting most gender norms or binary norms. They can look forward to having an arduous task of finding sustainable employment. I know I have friends who find work, but it's not the best work. It's not something they can look forward to retiring from. It's not something they can look forward to building a life on. And I think that's bad. I think it's a sad point in a society where it's normal for people to have to work multiple jobs just to make one life happen. And there's only but so many hours in a day. And so at what point are we living instead of working? And I really think that filling that gap of finding real inclusive, real sustainable employment and wages for trans and non-binary people is a huge problem, because like Tatyana wants to support in housing. Housing is very important, but how are you going to stay in that house? How are we going to get you self-sufficient? You're going to need a job to support that. Mulan wants to help with health. How do you continue? What are you being healthy for at the end of the day? So you can live. And once again, that circles right around to that employment piece, which makes all of this just as essential and just as necessary as a person with AIDS, a person with HIV, a person with cancer even. People have to be able to make a life for themselves. And I really think it's sad that we can't.
Yeah, all the gaps that everyone mentioned, it's so true. When you look at, if you go and to have a conversation with anybody and you talk about healthcare, housing, and employment, these are things that make the world go around. These are things that make your life continue. You know what I mean? So these are gigantic gaps, especially for Black trans women. And it's so hard to really find that. I know that we would kind of be remiss if we didn't speak about this, but discrimination, violence in the trans community in general is a huge thing. In the Black trans community, it's even higher. Anyone can kind of speak to this. Can you speak to maybe some of the discrimination you've experienced, some of the violence you experienced, for anyone who's watching that doesn't really understand the true experience of a Black trans woman?
Well, for me,
oh my God.
Go ahead.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I would say for me with the violence, I had endured a lot of violence, and that's maybe part of that was because I was a sex worker. And being a sex worker for so many years, I went through a lot of things as far as fighting, people jumping out on you. They even ride by throwing eggs at you every now and then. And I was raped. I'm gonna say I've been raped about 4 or 5 times, and it was hard, and especially being trans, because I remember my first time going out to work on the streets, and I got raped, and I seen another trans girl, and I ran to, and I'm crying. I'm telling her what happened, and she just looked at me. It's like, well, it's going to happen again. This comes with the territory, And we were taught, well, if you call the police, this is gonna happen. They're gonna end up taking you to jail because they want to know why you're out here doing what you're doing. That was part of it. Another part of violence that I went through that I call violence. Back in the day working the street, there was a lot of corrupt officers. I remember having to give blowjobs in order not to go to jail. Just so much discrimination in the workplace. When I first transitioned, I never wanted to be a sex worker, never. But looking for jobs was hard. I remember I did get a job working at a call center. Me and one of my girlfriends, we got hired the same day and fired the same day. We lasted about a week, but when it came to using the bathroom, of course, we're going to the women's restroom, and that was a problem for them, And then I'm like, how is that a problem? If I go into the men's room, it's a problem. If I go into the women's room, it's a problem. What do you want me to do? Just not go at all? So we end up quitting. We end up getting fired because we were still going into the women's restroom. And the last straw for me with working was I was trying to get a job at Lane Bryant. And I got the job and I went into work and it was like, oh no, you have to come as a male because we don't want our customers coming in or anybody's husbands coming in with their wives thinking that they could wear our clothes. So for me, that was the last straw personally, and I hit it to the streets. That was the last straw for me. I couldn't deal with the rejection anymore, and some friends were doing it, so I just tagged along, and that was my occupation for about 25 years.
Rejection is it's real, and all of us go through it, and none of us like it. And I don't think people really understand that going through in job interviews and this and that and being turned down so many times, your stomach is still going to be hungry. Your bills are still coming. You have to make a living. And that's why it's called survival sex work, because at the end of the day, you're just doing it to survive. Tatyana, do you want to talk to any discrimination or violence that you've experienced throughout your transition?
Oh, yes, of course I have a lot of violence. And I want to speak to not just me, navigating as a sex worker, being shot, jumping out of cars, guns being pulled on me. But I want to talk about those things. And I want to speak about Tito, right? Because for me, when I came into this industry, I had no knowledge of what that was. I had girlfriends already being killed, being murdered, and the policemen, there was no protections. They didn't care. The cases was going cold. Nobody it didn't even matter. They was treating us with total disrespect, and they was discriminating against us as a race, as not only as a race, but just as an individual. So for me, it goes so deep. And then I like to go a little bit deeper than that and talk about the intimate violence that I experienced from my own partner, right? So you experiencing this from partners. I had violence with that as well as a Black trans woman myself, thinking, okay, I have to accept this. Why? Because I didn't have the esteem in myself to know that I did not have to deal with it. So when people are here working in community, it's important to me, and it's important that women like us are sharing these stories so we can help our other counterparts, because those are the things that we don't talk about. It's important. This is what support groups look like. This is what education look like. Definitely. Discrimination isn't going anywhere. It's dressed up now. It's dressed up and it looks different, but when you peel back those layers, it's the same thing. That's what I've seen from then to now. It just looks different, and sometimes that discrimination comes from people that you think that are in place that have your best interest, and sometimes it's coming from them. So I look at it a little different. But when we're talking about being assaulted and things happening to us and going to the policeman and they're looking at us as if we brought that upon ourselves, definitely that's a problem. And that's something that I have experienced within the last 10 years. So yes, definitely. I mean, if a trans person that does not and do not identify with any discrimination or any protections or any laws. And as we were talking about when Shay was talking about employment is important, right? I know a lot of trans women and men that go to these places having, good employment, but then they're getting discriminated at work, and then there's no protections to protect us. So all of that's important. So it's like a full circle for us. Absolutely.
Something that you said really stood out. So many things did, but the intimate partner violence. People do not realize that, just like you said, self-esteem is low. I'm having to do what I have to do. This person's giving me attention. I feel like they love me. Wait, this isn't love. And you're going on this whole cycle. And the next thing you know, you're so far in that you either get out barely, you don't make it out. We've seen so many situations like that, and the corrupt police. When in sex work and something like someone forces themselves on you or something like that, you automatically have this guilt of, right. Oh, I guess I put myself in this situation, this and that. Right. But when you go to a law enforcement officer and they say that, what did you do to have that happen to you? What did you do to make him do that? Right. It really makes you look at everybody differently. You realize like you're in this on your own and you just have to kind of figure it out as you go. And that's a really sad reality. I don't think that needs to be a reality for anybody trans, especially Black trans women, that we just accept all of this, crap that falls on us just because of our identity. I don't really think that's fair, and hopefully we can change that. Hopefully. Shay, do you want to speak to any discrimination or violence that you've experienced or you've seen happen to friends and family?
I've seen lots of things like workplace discrimination. I had a friend who worked at the mall in Millennium, and she was made to use the men's restroom in the food court or use the family restroom in the food court, but she could not use female employee bathrooms, which was the only bathroom they had at the store she worked. And the last straw was she wet herself on her way to the bathroom. A grown woman. That was humiliating. That was her last day there. And I commended her for leaving that. I myself have experienced workplace discrimination. I was placed on a late night shift with a bunch of men, and I was the only woman there, and I was left in a place of authority. And of course, men don't want to listen to a woman, let alone a trans woman. And when I brought up these concerns with my bosses, it was more of, well, what you scared of, you know? You know, aren't you a man too? So those kind of things, yeah, were kind of disrespectful to me. And those workplaces, I wasn't there. When it comes to violence, I've experienced dating violence as well. I remember one time being choked by a boyfriend, and literally all his friends were watching and nobody did anything. And there was like 10 people there, and I literally felt alone. When that happens to a person, you know, it kind of gives you the message fast that that's not a safe space for you. And a relationship especially should be a safe space. With violence every day, I think we all have at least known one person who has been murdered. I have a friend in Jacksonville who was murdered. She was shot outside of a club. And that was really devastating to me to hear that, and to hear that the wheels of justice weren't moving as fast as they should have in her case. And many cases where there's a woman involved, like Tatyana said, I've had friends who told me about Tito, and I finally participated in a transgender day of remembrance. And that year we had decided to start reading the reasons why trans people were being killed, along with their age and where they lived. And there was just literally so much violence to trans people, bodies burned, people dragged out of cars, pushed out of vehicles, thrown out of cars, shot, chopped with machetes, the most horrific things. And I think that I think all of us on this panel are really trying to forge a place in our community where those things don't happen. And if they do happen, they're taken more seriously. We're treated like whole people from beginning to end. So.
And to the group, if someone watching is going through these situations, whether it's intimate partner violence, employment discrimination, violence, what is some advice that you could give them? Even if it's just something that helped you cope, or if it's a resource that you have, what would you say to them?
I would say reach out to, which is why I think we do what we do, so we can have a place so they can access that report or any services. But if you're in anywhere in the state of Florida and something like that happens to you or you are experiencing, please reach out to Trans Inclusive Group, transinclusivegroup.org. We will make sure, like I mentioned earlier in the beginning, whatever that is that you need, if it's an attorney, if you're experiencing something in the workplace, I love that. If you're experiencing something in the workplace, if you need a resource, whatever that looks like, you can contact me through the state of Florida. And if I have to circle back around and call Equality Florida and say, we got somebody over here and poke this or whatever, I'm going to do that. So I think it's important that we have these resources out in community, and you have to speak to someone. Don't ever feel like you are alone. That's the one thing that I can say. You are never alone. It's going to be always somebody that's probably experiencing the same thing. And the more we know about it, the more we can do something about it. So don't never feel like you're alone. That's what I say. If you could just share it with somebody, because that's somebody may can share it and get you the exact resource that you need.
Thank you for that. It's so true. You don't have to hold it in. You don't have to think that you're alone. You see the 3 women on the panel and countless others that have gone through things. So feel comfortable to reach out to somebody and don't harbor that in. What about you, Mulan or Shay? Anything you want to add to that?
I agree with her, and I was just trying to help them work on their self-worth to know that they're worth so much more than that. We're living in a different time. We have resources like Tatyana has said for everything. So I would just try to put them in the right direction and be there for them emotionally.
I'd say access your allies, any space that you're in, especially if you see that you're going to be the only trans person there or the only non-conforming person there. Identify your allies. Make sure that this space is actually going to be a safe space for you. Identify people who you know will have your back when something happens. Because I think all too often, a lot of us are left alone to fend for ourselves. And when we decide to reach out or when we get the opportunity to reach out, it's either too late, it's too far gone into the situation to where it's actually doing harm to your person. I think being able to stop those things dead in their tracks by having allies is very important.
Yeah, speaking to allies, to close out this segment, I want to ask all of you one question, and that is, if someone is an ally, wants to be an ally, how can they be a better ally? We get that question all the time. How can I support you? How can I help you? What is one thing that an ally could do that would really help support the community?
Hold the microphone while I
Have that around.
Hold on, one at a time. Go ahead, Shay. What'd you say?
Have my back even when I'm not around. Have my back even when I'm not there. Have my back even on the days you don't like me. If you're my ally, you're my ally on the good days and the bad days. You don't pick and choose when you're an ally. If somebody has that trust in you to have their back, don't call yourself an ally if it's very conditional. An ally is unconditional. And I think that is one of the main things that a lot of people need to realize when they identify themselves as an ally.
They sound harsh, but to me, just hold my microphone for me, because you see so many people calling themselves allies and they're in the forefront. They're trying to get the attention. They're trying to do this. They're trying to do that. And they don't realize they're not being an ally. They're looking out for themselves instead of really helping us. Help me at home. Don't try to get in front of everybody and try to help and say what you've done and this and that. Just hold my microphone and stand there and look cute.
and I wanna try and close this out as best as I can. So when I think about ally, I think about allyship, right? And a lot of times allies self-identify themselves as allies. When you are an ally, it's not something that you self-identify yourself as an ally. That's something that we feel that you are doing the work and you deserve it to be an ally to us. That's what's important.
I think it was breaking up. They didn't hear you say it one more time so they can hear it, Tati.
What I said again, you don't self-identify yourself as an ally. That's what we do. We let you know if you are an ally, if you are doing the work and you are doing intentional work. That's when you get to be an ally, not because you said it, not because you walked in a room and you stand there talk about you an ally. That doesn't mean nothing. We need an action behind that. That's what an ally is. You're using your privilege. You're releasing that privilege. As Shay mentioned earlier, you're able to speak when I can't, even when you don't like me, even if I say something that makes you uncomfortable. Because as an ally, you got to check that implicit bias. You got to understand that you're going to be in a room with a bunch of marginalized people, and sometimes we might step on a toe, and you got to be ready to accept that and be ready to work with us, because we are all working through something. When you come to marginalized communities as an ally, you got to understand we're working through a whole lot and we don't trust. So when you saying you're an ally, you got to build that trust. You don't walk through the room and make yourself no ally and you haven't built trust within our community. So that's something that we tell you that you are, and then you can take that and identify yourself as an ally. But you got to release those privileges, and you need to make sure that when there's something and you are able to access something that you know that can benefit that community, you're supposed to release that and you hand that over. That's what an ally is.
100%. I have to agree with all of you. And one last thing that makes a great ally is vote, and vote right. Make sure you vote and make sure you vote right. I want to thank you all so much, Mulan, Tatyana, Shay. This was an incredible conversation, so informative. The live comments were going crazy. So thank you all so much for sharing your experience, doing the work that you do, and please continue to be rock stars. And thank you all, the viewers, for joining us today, and we will see you tomorrow.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Everybody be safe.
How was I?